Chapter 91. A Sword Duel. Just as the name implied, it was a duel using swords. However, there were two additional rules. The first was that both participants needed a swordsman's qualification, and the second was that they needed to set the conditions the opponent needed to fulfill upon victory. Raon thought the sword duel was the best way of resolving the situation. You want to settle this in the swordsman's way, since this is the swordsman's ground? Glenn's powerful pressure subsided as he nodded. Indeed, I did mention such a thing. That's not wrong. My lord. I would like to request the same thing. Without missing the opportunity, Raon clapped his hands and stepped forward. I also need to pay him back. Please allow us to have a sword duel. It was an unexpected situation, but Balder seemed to think it was better to have a sword duel, as he stepped back and shut his mouth. Raon Zighart. The fact that you suggested the sword duel must mean that you are confident in your victory, right? Indeed. Raon nodded confidently. Raon Zighart. Glenn's gaze was directed at Raon this time. Yes. According to the report, I heard you kept losing to Raon from the beginning to the end. Are you confident in your victory in the rematch? Oh, of course. I was just taken off guard as I didn't expect him to start attacking. I'll show you an overwhelming victory if we can have another fight. Raon nodded his head like a woodpecker pecking a tree. That sounds entertaining. The corners of Glenn's mouth were raised slightly, which was a rare sight. Raon, what condition do you want to impose? I'll destroy Raon Zighart's energy center and break his mana circuits. Mana circuit and energy center? Yes, both of them. I'll allow it. It was a frightening condition, yet Glenn's expression didn't change at all. Thank you. Raon's face became as bright as the magical light. Raon Zighart. Yes. What do you want to do if you win the sword duel? I want Raon Zighart and his butler to kneel and apologize to my mother and the maids, and give material compensation. I also want no one related to the true martial palace to get near the annex building. Apology and prohibiting access. I'll allow that as well. Father. Apology concerns Raon, but the access prohibition concerns the entirety true martial palace. It exceeds the rights of a sword duel. Balder. Glenn's red eyes were directed at Balder, who lowered his eyes to the ground as if he had just looked at the sun. This is your final warning. I apologize. Balder stepped back and lowered his head. Maintaining his storming pressure, Glenn looked at Raon and Raon one after another. I've allowed the conditions from both of you. The sword duel will be held in 1 week at the Great Training Ground. Yes. Thank you. Raon and Raon bowed at once. The discussion is over. You shall leave. Yes. Since Raon had said all that he wanted to say, he left the audience chamber. A sword duel, huh? You are taking our side in the end. Balder stepped forward and smiled. Even if he is a talented son of Sylvia, he is still a collateral. We will show the clear difference between a member of the direct line and a collateral. Raon, I'm sure you can do it, right? Of course. I became an intermediate level expert through this mission. I only need one hand to win against a guy that has just reached novice level expert. Raon and Balder narrowed their eyes and smiled, the exact same way. They truly were a father and his son. How about just killing him during the sword duel? It will prevent the arrogant collateral guy's rudeness in the future. No, that's not a good idea as everyone will be watching. It's better to disable him and destroy his hopes. Mother and son both becoming disabled, with their energy center and mana circuit destroyed, sounds great. Just imagine it. Balder giggled, as if malice was the only thing he had towards Sylvia and Raon, who were actually his little sister and his nephew. Certainly, that's the case. Raon nodded his head with a smile. The father and son were talking as if he had already won the sword duel and Raon was in the palm of his hand. You shall return as well. Yes. See you again in a week. Raon and Balder left the audience chamber, brimming with smiles. My lord, Ren finally stood in front of Glenn after everyone had left. Young Master Raon is a novice level expert, and the young Master Raden is already an intermediate level expert. Isn't it going to be dangerous since their levels are clearly different? Ren's voice was lower than usual since he had taken a liking to Raon. A swordsman's fight isn't decided simply by their levels or the techniques they have learned. The nature of the person is the most important factor. I'm aware of that fact as well, but of course, it's true that there is a difference in level between them. However, Raon's eyes were peaceful. They were filled with confidence, which was different from the arrogance or overconfidence of fighting against an opponent he had already won against. How can I not trust him after seeing those eyes? Glenn smiled gently, unlike earlier. It was the warm gazes of a grandfather watching his grandson being cute. Moreover, unlike Raden, Raon's conditions were for the sake of his family, with nothing about his own protection or compensation for himself. He was more likable the more he saw him. Ren. Yes. Use any excuse to decrease the True Martial Palace's budget next month in half. Retrieve all the missions they took as well. There is going to be backlash. It doesn't matter. Tell them to come to me if they have a problem. Understood. Ren bowed his head, then looked up at Glenn. It was rare to see his eyes contain anger. I guess it's natural since they touched his sore finger. Sylvia and Raon were Glenn's sore finger. It looked like he couldn't forgive them, even though they were his other fingers. He looks like he is returning to the way he was before. Ren smiled, hiding his face. He couldn't stop smiling because Glenn looked like a grandfather taking revenge on the guy who hit his grandson. Sylvia and the maids were outside the annex building when Raon returned. Why are you outside? How did it go? Sylvia's hands, which were gathered in front of her chest, were trembling. Even though she was strong when it concerned herself, she looked nervous when it was about her son. We are going to have a sword duel in a week. A sword duel? No way. A sword duel? Sylvia and Helen grabbed Raon's shoulders and shook him. I'm going to have a sword duel against Raden Zighart. What? What did you just say? No, what even happened for a sword duel? Their eyes were wavering like a sailboat on a river. The maids also gasped, unable to close their mouths. I had many considerations, but a sword duel is the best solution. Raon declared, meeting Sylvia's eyes. It can't be any better. The enemy was a member of the direct line, and they were collateral. Getting Glenn's acknowledgement was the only way of preventing them from harming the annex building, on top of making Raden apologize. But Raon, what you saw that day wasn't Raden at his best. Sylvia came up to him and grabbed his hand. The trembling of her hand passed on to his wrist. Brother Baldur's weapon is a flexible sword. Raden also must have learned a technique to handle flexible swords. He is going to be a completely different person once he reveals his true strength. That's true, young master. The True Martial Palace's techniques are famous for their ever-changing nature. You can't take it easy on this matter. He must be stronger than the green war demon that the young master defeated. He is not going to be careless this time, and your injuries aren't completely healed yet. I can't allow this. I'm going to father. If I plead to him now. Mom! Raon grabbed Sylvia's shoulder after she let his hand go, about to run to the main building. It's all right. Trust me. Noticing his slight smile, Sylvia, about to start running, turned around. The head of house taught me something. Father did? Yes. I can win against him if I use that. That's why I'll nullify the promise with Mom about forbidding my training. After saying that, Raon went inside the annex building. Sylvia was standing there blankly, unable to stop Raon. My lady, even if the head of house taught him something, shouldn't you stop the young master? Helen swallowed, standing next to Sylvia. I was going to, but I felt relieved for some reason upon seeing Raon's eyes. Actually, the same thing happened to me. Helen nodded, telling her that she felt the same thing. But we can't just stand here doing nothing. Let's find anything we can do for Raon. Yes. The maids all nodded in unison. Judiel's eyes shone as she looked at the annex building that Sylvia and Raon had entered. Raon changed into his training outfit in his room, then went to the annex building's open area. The maids kept glancing at him as they passed, but he didn't pay attention to them. What's important right now is the sword duel. The rumor about the sword duel was going to spread quickly. Since he had already attracted attention, it was better to receive even more attention so that the true martial palace couldn't try anything funny. That was why he needed to win the sword duel, and with an overwhelming difference on top of it. Flexible sword, ha! Flexible swords were, as the name suggested, swords that were flexible. They might simply have a higher elasticity, but some flexible swords could bend freely like whips. As such, there were a wide variety of flexible swords. The true martial palace's swordsmen were people that were capable of combining those flexible swords with flashy techniques. The higher the swordsman's abilities, the more the flexible swords could bend. A powerful flexible sword user could even create a wall with the sword. I'm sure Raden's sword is also extremely elastic. Since he was the son of the true martial palace master, famous for the flexible sword, Raden's technique should be also on a different level from the common flexible swordsmanship. However, he couldn't imagine himself losing. He had learned the supreme harmony steps Glenn had taught him personally, and he had already experienced assassinating an excellent flexible swordsman. Whether Raden used a flexible sword or he was an intermediate level expert didn't matter at all to Raon. Clang! Raon unwrapped the bandage Sylvia forced on him and drew his sword. Slashing with the star connecting sword, he stepped with the river footwork. His movement was flowing as smoothly as a single line, which could already be considered complete. Upon performing the last form of the star connecting sword, Raon's movement differed from the river footwork. He extended his left foot instead of his right foot and kicked the ground. Clank! Raon's body became as blurry as dust at that instant, and he reappeared 3 steps ahead like lightning. Even if a person watched him, they would have seen him disappear then reappear. Whoosh! Raon slashed his sword. The strike separating the space was an aura blade that seemed capable of cutting through anything. Ha! Raon exhaled and stopped his sword. This is the Supreme Harmony Steps. The Supreme Harmony Steps wasn't simply footwork. It was a special footwork that could be mixed in between other footworks to create the most appropriate movement for the situation. Since his mind was focused on defeating the enemy that insulted Sylvia and Helen, he felt like his training was more efficient. Then, Raon brandished his sword once again and stomped the ground, training until the sun moved from the middle of the sky and went down into darkness. Raon's schedule didn't change the next day. He went to the open area at daybreak and swung his sword over and over. One might ask why he was repeating the same thing over and over, but Raon knew that it was the correct thing to do. This repetition will save my life. What would save his life during a battle of life and death wasn't a new technique or expensive armor. The martial arts that became as natural as breathing through endless training was the only thing that would save him. Raon kept moving his feet and swinging his sword without rest. He mixed in the Supreme Harmony Steps in between the river footwork in order to increase the proficiency of the Supreme Harmony Steps. When it was time for lunch, Judiel went out to the open area, carrying a tray covered with white cloth. "Young master, I've brought your lunch." "Lunch?" Raon stopped practicing and turned around. "Yes, I brought simple sandwiches for you to eat." Since he was hungry, he sheathed his sword and sat at the table where Judiel put down the tray. "Since you've been exercising until a moment ago, please eat slowly to avoid upsetting your stomach." "Thank you." "Yes." Judiel bowed, then returned to the annex building. Raon wiped his hands with a wet towel, then rolled up the white cloth covering the tray. There was a thin book next to the dish containing neatly prepared sandwiches. "What's this?" He frowned slightly and picked up the book. There was no name on the book, and the cover was so smooth that it looked like it had been created moments before. "Ha!" Raon gasped upon reading the contents. The names and particulars of Raden Sieghart's swordsmanship and footwork were written inside the book. Moreover, they were arranged in a way to make it easy to read. This book. The book certainly contained extraordinary information, but it wasn't something that existed already. She made it. It must have been a book that Judiel had made in a single day on Raden and the True Martial Palace. She really was outstanding considering she had also been doing her job as a maid while making the book. It would have been a shame to keep using her as a spy despite her talent. Raon smiled broadly, looking at Judiel's back and walking towards the annex building. She isn't simply better than I thought. She is going to be really useful, far exceeding my expectations. Chapter 92. Sylvia was cleaning up the garden that she didn't finish the day before. She was skillfully transforming the messy grass into a round shape, like a fluffy cushion. Fortunately, they aren't too badly ruined. Helen, who was helping her from behind, came up next to her. You are right. It might become better than before after a little bit more work. Sylvia used her scissors while smiling lightly. She cleaned up the messy places, as if she was trying to erase all traces of Radon's violence. My lady. Is it okay to leave the young master like that? Helen's face was ashen gray. It looked like she had been too worried to sleep properly, and the same went for the other maids, as they kept blinking their eyes. Shouldn't we stop the sword duel at any cost? That's what I thought in the beginning. Sylvia nodded while handing over the scissors. I thought I needed to stop it at all costs, and not let the sword duel happen no matter what. I was about to visit my father right away. Then why? Because Raon, that little boy, had the face of a real swordsman. There was something I told him before he left on his first mission. I told him to live proudly, like the Sieghart swordsman in the past. She turned around to meet Helen's eyes and smiled at the maids. Raon is way prouder and more awesome than what I told him. So much so that I'm even ashamed of my current self. My lady. Since my child can make that kind of expression, I have to trust him as his mother. And? Sylvia smiled slightly, looking towards the back of the annex building, where Raon should have been training. Just as you felt, I had a feeling that everything was going to be okay when Raon said it would be alright. Our job now is to trust him and wait with a smile. Raon burned the paper containing Radon's information that Judiel gave him after memorizing everything. Despite having never witnessed Radon's flexible swordsmanship, he felt like he could draw it in his head thanks to the detailed information he'd been given. It should be enough to just keep training like this. Since his goal was to overwhelm Raon using the star connecting sword and the river footwork, which were common techniques, the information allowed him to prepare for the duel a lot more easily. He modified the footwork and the swordsmanship's flow slightly using Judiel's information and started training once again. His movements became a lot more systematic as he imagined the enemy's movement while swinging his sword and using his footwork. While he was fully focused on his training, a thin coldness came out from the iceflower bracelet. This is so sad. Raph laughed at him while clicking his tongue. It's so pathetic that you need to make so much effort to fight garbage like him. The King of Essence would have been able to freeze him to the bones with breath alone. I can easily win against him in my current state. Raon pushed away Raph, who was breathing at him. But the important part is to achieve an overwhelming victory, where his sword doesn't even get close to reaching my body. I don't understand. Isn't winning enough? No. Raon shook his head. If it was a simple match, it didn't matter how he won. However, this case was different. Me and the annex building became the target of the direct line and their followers when I offended Raon. Even if the true martial palace can't threaten us anymore after my victory, there are probably going to be others targeting us instead. Every house had a high and thick wall between the direct line and the collaterals. And the wall's thickness was impenetrable when it concerned a prestigious family like Sieghart. The direct line and their followers didn't want the collaterals to reach the same rank as them, even if they were people who used to be a part of the direct line. That's why I need to show them. It was necessary to carve the fact that he was more useful than the direct line into Glenn's memory. Ever since ancient times, humans have always been quibbling over lineage, and the density of the lineage on top of it, even though blood is red regardless of that. Who do they think they are, vampires? It's really an unsightly and nasty tradition. I agree with you for the first time. Raon showed a bitter smile at the fact that he was agreeing with a devil that got angry at anything and everything. Do your best, since everything you possess will become mine eventually. Raph returned to the bracelet after saying that. Wow, it's amazing how he can be so annoying with a single word. Raon stood up while laughing coldly. As he was about to resume his training, he felt the presence of somebody approaching. It's not Judiel. It wasn't Sylvia or Helen, but it was a very familiar presence. A small shape appeared as he stood still, waiting. Ha! Blank eyes, fluttering silver hair, snow-white skin. Runan was approaching the open area. Runan, MHM. Runan was walking with soft steps like a cat, hugging a package wrapped in a cloth. Upon arriving next to him, she sat down next to the tree. Why are you? Fight. It looked like Runan was also aware of Raon's fight against Raon. It wasn't a simple fight though, it was a sword duel. So I came here. She started unwrapping the cloth she brought, her small fingers fidgeting. Raon felt numerous gazes on them while watching Runan and raised his head. Behind the walls, the rocks, and the trees, Sylvia, Helen, and the maids were watching them. Seriously, these people. He thought they'd become serious for once, but they had returned to being easygoing already. They really were strange. It's done. He turned around upon hearing Runan's voice. The package contained the ice cream box she carried around like a treasure. Tap. Runan opened the box, revealing 5 bead ice creams. They were bigger and shinier than before, and white steam could be seen rising from them. Eat. Raon stayed still, and Runan started waving her hand in front of his eyes. Looking at her eyes, he thought he needed to eat something at least. However, he needed to choose something other than Runan's favorite pink ice cream. What are you doing? Eat it already. Wrath, who had returned to the bracelet earlier, popped back out like a mole. The King of Essence likes that green one. Eat the green ice cream with chocolate on it. Hurry up. Because Raon wasn't touching the ice cream, Wrath grew anxious and started spreading coldness everywhere. You are so noisy. Raon frowned. He didn't even look at the green ice cream Wrath wanted. As he was licking his lips, thinking about what to pick, Runan's hand came towards his head. What? He wondered whether he should avoid her hand or not, but she didn't have any murderous intent nor animosity. Raon prepared to move any time it was necessary, by warming up the muscles in his entire body. Tap tap. Runan's hand lightly tapped his head twice, rendering his anxiety pointless. Runan? Runan? Raon's lips parted as he looked around. Runan nodded while visibly raising the corners of her mouth and caressed his head once again. It's all right. Looking at her gently shining silver eyes and hearing her calm voice, his heart tingled. That girl had visited the annex building in order to return the favor of telling her it was all right back when she fought against the orc. Ha! Raon smirked. It was funny that such a small child was worried about him once again. However, it didn't feel that bad. He wasn't too sure, but it felt like some emotion was making his heart swell. Why are you smiling? It's nothing. He shook his head, taking the black bead ice cream from the box and put it in his mouth. His mouth was filled with a sugary, bitter taste, just like the emotion he was feeling. Oh! Chocolate! It looks like it's been fermented for a long time after adding sugar and coffee into the chocolate. Back in Devildom, the King of Essence liked coffee. What are you doing? Shut up. Raon forced Wrath back into the bracelet to avoid his long-winded speech. Is it delicious? It is. Thank you. Eat more. No, that's enough. It really was enough. Rather than his belly being filled, it felt like his heart was full. He didn't need it anymore. I see. Runan swallowed the red bead ice cream on the right side, then stood up. I'm leaving. Then she left. It looked like she was telling him she wasn't going to disturb his training since she finished what she came to do. Ha ha. Raon smiled, looking at Runan's light steps. Just looking at her back was enough to make him smile now. Raon. As soon as Runan left, Sylvia, who was hiding behind a tree, approached him. Your mom thinks you are closer than simple friends. That's not an average ice cream. It's a very expensive snack. I'm also curious. From the look of it, it's not the first time you've received ice cream from her. Raon, Mom wants to talk to her. Stop talking, both of you. Raon shook his hand. He didn't want them to be depressed, but he hated their playful gazes even more. Please. The next day, there was a second visitor to the annex building. Raon narrowed his eyes, looking at the guest that looked grumpy as he walked. Honestly, he thought Runan might visit him again since she liked following after him or learning his training methods. However, that guy was really unexpected. Bayan. Raon tilted his head, looking at Bayan as he walked elegantly towards him like a noble. He seriously couldn't figure out why he was visiting him. I heard you were going to have a sword duel against Raon. Bayan pouted and stopped walking. Did you also hear about it? The rumor is spreading throughout the entire house. They say that you arrogantly got into big trouble. Big trouble. You attacked a member of the direct line despite being a collateral and requested the sword duel despite not being a qualified swordsman. Of course the higher-ups wouldn't like that. Bayan looked down at the seated Raon and snorted. As Raon was about to ask him whether he came to make fun of him, Bayan opened his mouth once again. However, I think you did a great job. I like it. What? Raon's jaw dropped after hearing something he never expected Bayan to say. Raon is a piece of trash that keeps tarnishing Sieghart's name despite being a member of the direct line. He is strong, but he doesn't have any honor or conviction. His voice was boiling with anger. As soon as I heard there was an issue between you and Raon, I immediately guessed that the damn bastard picked a fight first. And my expectations were correct. Bayan's words signified that he actually trusted Raon, which was rather unexpected of him. Take this. Bayan took out a box from his pocket at the size of a palm and handed it over. What is this? It's medicine to apply on your injury. It's too cheap for me to use, but I brought it here as I figured it would be suitable for you. Take it. Quickly. Bayan forced him to take the medicine and turned around. You are the 5th training ground's top trainee. Take that responsibility and don't lose, no matter what. After saying that, he returned the same way he came there. Interestingly, he was walking faster and faster. Judging from his red earlobes, he was being shy. Raon opened the lid of the box in his hand. The clear smell of the medicine came from it. He took a small amount of the medicine and spread it on his injured wrist, and the pain subsided along with a warm energy. Is he telling me this is cheap? The clear smell and the medicine's color told him that it was definitely not a cheap one. When he looked behind the lid, it said Saiman. Saiman was a guild famous for the efficiency of its medicines. It was a rare item, one that was difficult to obtain with money. What's happening? Raon shook his head and put the medicine in his pocket. Raon, when did you become close to Bayan? Young master, another friend. Since Bayan was gone, Sylvia and Helen, who were spectating them, approached him with a smile. Stop coming here. Unlike the busy annex building where Raon was training every day, the true martial palace remained silent. It looked like they didn't even care about the sword duel against Raon, since they were certain about their victory. Going along with that atmosphere, Raon wasn't doing any training and stayed even relaxed more than usual. Young master. The butler Merkin bowed to Raon. What? Raon, who was lying in bed with a red-haired maid, turned his head. Shouldn't you start training a little now? There's not much time left until the sword duel. Training? Did you just say that to me? Raon chuckled and raised his body. Why would I need to train to fight a weakling like that? If I had used the flexible sword back then, he would have been 6 feet under by now, in pieces. But his movements were rather extraordinary. I managed to predict his sword and blocked it, but I didn't even manage to see his fist properly. Merkin rubbed the place Raon had hit him. Don't think I'm the same as you. Gore. Raon threw the wine glass from the table. As the glass containing red wine broke, red liquid spread across the floor like blood. I know the techniques he uses. It's the star connecting sword and the river footwork that I've also learned. I can shred him apart with my eyes closed if I use the flexible sword. You should be the one training. You fucking fainted at the most important moment. Please, excuse me. Get out of my sight. Raon shouted, then laid down on the bed once again. Merkin bowed, then left Raon's room. It's over. Merkin shook his head, looking at Raon's room where a giggling sound could be heard. It looked like he had no intention of training because of the humiliation he felt from losing to Raon. He must have been trying to protect his ego by showing that he could defeat him without training. Raon Zighart. However, he had obtained information that Raon was training every day, to the best of his abilities, from the annex building. That guy is really outstanding. Raon's movements were enigmatic. It was difficult to read his presence or movement, much like an assassin. Phew. Merkin sighed. He felt like he could already see the result of the sword duel. Martha was sitting on a tree at the entrance of North Grave Mountain where she could see the open area in the annex building. Tisk. She clicked her tongue, wrapping the black hair that was touching her cheek around her finger. He is annoyingly popular. Why are there so many people visiting him? Martha was looking at Raon, who was sitting in the open area and talking with the 5th training ground trainees. While she had been watching him, she had already seen 7 trainees visiting Raon. She couldn't hear them exactly, but they looked like they were cheering for his victory. Since when did they become friends? Looking at the trainees that were pretending to be his friends after the last mission, despite the fact that they had never cared about him in the training ground, Martha felt irritated. They are all so pathetic. Why don't you try visiting him, too? Kia. Hearing a voice from behind, Martha screamed and fell from the tree. Wow, it feels great to tease you. When she raised her head, Rimmer was giggling while swinging his feet in the air. Raon's no fun since he doesn't get surprised with something like this. You damned elf. Martha ground her teeth and raised her body. As her black eyes were about to be dyed into red, Rimmer shook his hand. Is that really okay? He already noticed. She turned around following Rimmer's chin gesture, and Raon was looking at them from the open area. Ugh, you must have done this on purpose. If you come to visit him, you should go see him and cheer him up. I didn't come here to cheer him up. Ha? Then what are those things in your pocket? Are they for me? Ah, it's because he saved me during the mission. Martha put her hand in her coat pocket and wrinkled her nose. Cheer him up. It's going to help him. Rimmer smiled and pointed at the open area. Raon was still looking at them. Damn it. Martha bit her lip and went down the mountain. HNNG. Rimmer started humming, lying on the branch Martha fell from. She's so naive. I guess that's the privilege of children. Raon narrowed his eyes as he watched Martha walk down from the North Grave Mountain. He had already realized she was up there, but he wasn't expecting her to come down. It seemed Rimmer had played a prank on her. Hey! Hey! Martha threw a small glass bottle and a square box wrapped in cloth at him. Ha! Raon caught the box and the bottle flying towards his chest. I'm returning the favor for that time. Consume them before the sword duel starts. It's not poison. That's mind-clearing water that recovers your willpower, so you can drink it or throw it away if you want. As he stared at the glass bottle, Martha took a step closer to him and frowned. Thank you. Raon put the glass bottle in his pocket. I was going to trample on that son of a monkey because he kept being annoying, but you beat me to it. Make sure to leave him half dead since you're fighting him, that way he won't be able to act rude against your mom ever again. Okay. I'm canceling my promise with you if you lose to that son of a monkey. Raon just nodded and Martha turned around, fluttering her black hair, which reached under her shoulders now. I'm leaving. She left the open area without even looking back. Why did she not say anything about this one? Raon tilted his head and opened the box Martha gave him. Beef? Beef was inside the box, and its quality seemed to be much higher than the usual meat he had in the annex building. It was her doing. Sylvia had mentioned a high-quality beef was left in front of the annex building occasionally, and it ended up being Martha's gift. Are you telling me that Black Eyes was the one that provided that tasty beef? Yes. Fine. The King of Essence is a generous monarch. I'm going to call the Black Eyes the beef girl from now on. Ignoring Wrath's useless chatter, Raon took the beef. It was at that moment that Sylvia and Helen burst out from the bush like moles coming out of their holes. Beef and mind-clearing water? She is full of consideration for you, Raon. Indeed. Beef is great, but presenting something as expensive as mind-clearing water means you aren't just friends. Raon, invite Martha to a meal next time. Ah, please go away. Raon shook his head. They quickly retreated into the bush, then went back to the annex building. Seriously. It was only a few days ago that he was worried about them because of how depressed they were, but their lightheartedness was now getting out of control. Well, I guess this is better. Sylvia and Helen were showing that cheerful attitude because they trusted him and didn't want to make him worry. They were cheerful people to begin with. Raon needed to keep the harmful people from even touching their shadows in order to protect their smiles. Raon slowly caught his breath, then stood up to resume his training. The training continued day and night, and the day of the sword duel finally came. Chapter 93. The direct line and people who got the permission from division leaders or the head of house were the only people allowed to train in the Sieghart Great Training Ground. However, there were a few exceptions. The sword duel was one of them. In case a sword duel happened where two swordsmen fought, putting their pride at stake, everyone that wanted to spectate was allowed to enter the Great Training Ground. There was more than an hour left until the start of the sword duel, but the Great Training Ground seats were already full because of how famous the two participants were. Those that didn't manage to take a seat were busily moving around in order to find a decent spot on the outskirts. The Great Training Ground looked like the marketplace with so many people babbling around, but they were all pretty much talking about the same thing. This is a really peculiar sword duel, one that probably doesn't even happen once every 100 years. Anyone who misses this duel will regret it for their entire life. Indeed, a fight like this will never happen again. I guess, since it's between a swordsman from the direct line and a collateral trainee. And they are the most rumored children nowadays. A duel between a swordsman from the direct line and a collateral trainee. And since it was a sword duel between two people that had recently performed great achievements for the house, people were extremely interested in the event. I wonder who is going to win between Raon and young Master Raon. It's not going to be fun if they are on a different level. Even though it's a peculiar sword duel, the result has already been decided. It's impossible for Raon to win, even if he is strong for his age. But I heard he killed the Green War Demon. Raon didn't do that alone. He fought alongside the 5th Training Grounds trainees. On the other hand, young Master Raon destroyed a White Blood Religion's branch on his own. Even if it was a small branch, that's not something easy to do. Since most of the swordsmen believed Raon's rumor was exaggerated, they were sure that Raon was going to win. No way, Raon held his ground against the blood-raving demon, who was at master's level. You won't know until they fight. That's just Rimmer spewing bullshit. It's a lie. No, I think he held his ground. For a few seconds. I don't like the young Master Raon, and think it was his mistake this time, but it can't be helped. He is already an intermediate level expert, which is way stronger than Raon. Indeed. I guess. It looked like the public opinion had been decided, and the number of people expecting Raon to win kept decreasing. The swordsmen in the Great Training Ground could already imagine Raon's loss in their heads. I think it would be great of him if Raon manages to make a stand for some time. If the head of house is satisfied with the fight, he might change the content of the bet. You are babbling so much dogs hit through that trap. Who, ugh. The swordsmen turned their heads upon hearing a chilly voice from behind them. Martha Sieghart was standing there, wrinkling her lovely forehead. Bullshit? Lies? Martha leaned forward and snorted. If that was really a lie, do you think me or Bain would have done nothing about it? Is your head just a decoration? How about thinking from time to time, huh? Vulgar words came from her mouth despite her beautiful appearance. That's... The swordsman turned while groaning instead of talking back to Martha. They had no choice, since they didn't dare offend Denier Sieghart's beloved daughter even though they were official swordsmen. Watch closely with those dead fish eyes of yours. Martha crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair. Since something completely different from your expectations is about to happen. Denier raised his daughter incorrectly. Balder, who was sitting on the platform, crossed his legs and smiled coldly. No, I guess he didn't raise her incorrectly, but picked the wrong child. He murmured that there was no way she could be talented as she had peepholes for eyes. However, he didn't really care about how Martha rudely treated the swordsman. That was the extent of the difference existing in the world between the direct lines and collaterals or people below them. The fight is already decided. I want the sword duel to be over already and hear that arrogant bastard scream. The result of the duel was as plain as day. No matter how talented Raon was, it was impossible for him to win against Raon, as he had never experienced fighting a flexible sword. He smiled in anticipation, eager to watch Raon scream upon getting his energy center destroyed and his mana circuit ripped apart after the sword duel. Oh. It's been a long time. Hearing a cheerful voice that didn't match the platform's solemn atmosphere, Balder's head turned. Rimmer? The red-haired elf was walking up to him while grinning like a fool. Why are you here? I came to see you since I noticed you while passing by. Then just keep passing by. Ah ha ha. Nice joke. Even though he told him to go away, Rimmer didn't get down from the platform, sticking next to Balder instead. Do you think we are close enough to joke around? It's because you said something funny. What? You said the fight is already decided. What do you mean by that? Your broken eyes should still be able to see it, the difference in pressure between Raon and the loser you've trained. There's certainly a clear difference. Rimmer whistled, looking at Raon and Raon, who were standing on opposite sides of the great training ground. But the fight isn't necessarily decided by pressure and might. That's only true concerning the bugs. Once they are at the expert level, it's difficult to overcome the difference in level. Moreover, Raon is a flexible swordsman. Your student will be ripped apart with his flesh and bone torn off. Then shall we make a bet? What? If you are that confident, let's make a bet. Rimmer smiled broadly and extended his hand. Is this another trick of yours, just like when you spread that false rumor about him fighting against the blood-raving demon? There's no way a trick would work when the head of house is going to witness the fight today. Balder's pupils expanded. This was the reason that Rimmer was difficult to deal with. He was still meeting the head of house, his father, once in a while. Since you look so confident, let's bet something. If you are scared, you can just withdraw. Shut your mouth. Balder frowned, and the foothold under his feet was crushed. Ah ha ha. It was a joke. What are you going to bet? I'm betting this. A leaf-shaped dagger came out from Rimmer's shirt. It was reflecting a mysterious light, and the clear scent of real leaves under the sunlight. This is... I'm sure you recognize this. Are you seriously putting this at stake for the bet? Of course. The bet is all about all in. All in. Then what do you want? Do you want my dragon's diamond warblade or something? No, I don't need something like that. Rimmer shook his head and grinned. It was the same expression as when he was playing a prank on Bayan or Raon. Raon rolled his wrists and ankles to warm himself up. Even though it was his first time visiting the great training ground, and countless people were watching him, he didn't feel nervous at all. The medicine was really effective. Probably because he drank the mind-clearing water before coming there, his head was clear and his heart was beating slowly and calmly. Bayan's medicine was also effective, and his injuries were now completely healed. It seemed he could bring out the best of his abilities, just like when he trained in the open area or in the 5th training ground. Raon looked at Raon, who was standing on the opposite side from him. He was sipping on wine right before the fight. He must be trying to show his confidence. The reason that he was showing such a carefree attitude was simple. He was trying to show the difference between himself and Raon. However, that was something he shouldn't be doing unless there was an overwhelming difference or he was certain about his victory. Raon smiled coldly, looking at Raon as he enjoyed a massage from a maid. He was going to regret what happened that day for the rest of his life. Sieghart's heaven is entering. Everyone, show your respect. As he was warming up his shoulders, the swordsman standing in front of the training ground's main entrance started shouting. Rumble. The enormous door split open, and Glenn entered along with the Heavenly Blade Division. Despite having lots of people around him, only Glenn entered Raon's sight. His breathtaking pressure was making the training ground's atmosphere as sharp as needles piercing the skin. The stronger he got, the more he realized how high Glenn's level was, giving him goosebumps. Greeting my lord. Raon knelt and bowed, just like everyone in the training ground. Do you really have to kneel down and bow every single time you see him? It must be really annoying to be human. Wrath clicked his tongue in irritation. However, his voice contained a slight note of envy. Since he went down from being the monarch of Devildom to a shabby freeloader living in the bracelet, he seemed to be jealous of Glenn, who received respect and fear from everyone. You are so narrow-minded. What did you say? Nothing. Raon lowered his head and smiled slightly. Everyone, rise. In the meantime, Glenn sat on the throne in the middle of the platform and opened his mouth. Even though it was a quiet voice, everyone could hear it clearly. Thank you. Sieghart's swordsman bowed once again, then stood up. Good. Glenn slowly lowered his gaze to look at Raon on the west and Raon on the east, one after the other, then nodded. Begin the sword duel. Yes. The ringmaster, who was standing under the platform, bowed to Glenn before he turned around. Whoosh! As soon as he raised his hand, the flag-bearers standing on the great training ground's outskirts waved the flags with the flame sword's emblem at the same time, which created an illusion of the entire training ground rippling in flames. Competitors, come forth. Finally. Raon extended his hand with a grin, and the maid standing behind him brought him his sword. He took out a wobbling sword from the sheath longer than a spear. Kring! The long and thin flexible sword flailed like a snake, creating a strange sound. Raon looked back, ignoring Raon's murderous gaze. He could see Sylvia biting her lip while holding onto the handrail tightly. He conveyed his message with his gaze, it was all right, so just rest assured and wait. Helen and the maids were clasping their hands together next to Sylvia, shoulders trembling as if they were praying to God. Raon braced himself. It wasn't a fight against Raon, but a war in order to protect them. Ha! Raon exhaled to empty his mind and stepped up to face Raon. Ha! Raon tilted his head back to look at the sky. How long had he been waiting for this day? 1 week felt longer than an entire year. I can finally pay him back. The humiliation he felt in the annex building. The time had finally come for him to change the spiteful gazes of the swordsmen as they held their laughter in each time they looked at him. Holding back the excitement filling his entire body, he brandished his flexible sword. Come at me. That bastard. Raon grinded his teeth. Raon was looking at Sylvia and the maids behind him instead of himself. Raon's disinterest towards him right before the fight exasperated him. I'm going to cut your limbs off. Raon became exhilarated upon imagining Raon and the maid's expressions after he cut off his limbs during the sword duel, getting his energy center and mana circuit destroyed as a result. Be ready. Raon flexed his wrist, hearing the ringmaster's signal. Although he was only moving his wrist slightly, the flexible sword wriggled like a snake. I'm ready. Raon nodded without even drawing his sword. Ha, it's my first time seeing such an arrogant bastard. Raon raised his chin and wrinkled his nose. I'm going to teach you how lucky you were that day. Lucky? Raon snickered, touching the sheath of his sword. Seriously, you bastard. Please step back. The ringleader forcefully pushed Raon back. Let's see if you can still smile like that after your arms get cut off and your energy center gets ripped apart. I guess you won't be able to see it. Raon grabbed the sheath while maintaining his smile. Crack! Crack! Raon stepped back while grinding his teeth to a point that they could break. It was better to start the sword duel faster instead of arguing with him. The ringleader checked their readiness with his gaze and they both nodded their heads. Then, the sword duel between Raon Sieghart and Raon Sieghart has begun. The ringleader raised his hand, blocking the sight between Raon and Raon, then stepped back. Ha 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 ha. Raon laughed like a madman and swung his flexible sword. With a fluttering sound, the sword curled like a ribbon and dove at Raon. Raon twisted his body like a drifting flower petal to dodge the flexible sword. Do you really think you managed to dodge it? Raon raised his wrist and the flexible sword fluctuated like a tidal wave, following Raon. Coup! Raon tried dodging the flexible sword using the river footwork, but Raon was already aware of that flow. I told you already. It's different from back then. Try running away. Raon grinned and used the third form of crystal flexible sword, demonic crystal. The flexible sword's blade bent in a zigzag, aimed at Raon's leg. Clank! Raon drew his sword and lowered it. He seemed to be trying to block the demonic crystal because he wasn't able to dodge it. Coup! Raon licked his lips. What an idiot! Flexible swordsmanship was extremely difficult to defend against because its direction changed too quickly. If he tried defending what he saw, he would get cut somewhere else. The same went for Raon. He lowered his sword in order to defend the attack against his legs, but that was a huge mistake. Swish! Raon turned his wrist, the flexible sword aimed at Raon's thigh bursting up like a snake crawling up a vine. I'm going to take your arm, just like I warned you I would. He could already see Raon screaming as his sharp blade slashed through Raon's arm. Ha! Raon swallowed. Right before the flexible sword ripped apart his arm, Raon disappeared from his sight. WHWHE, gasp. Raon's hand, the one holding his sword, trembled as he screamed. Something cold could be felt against his neck. When he turned his eyes, Raon, who had disappeared, was touching his neck with his sword. What happened? This is the first time. First time? First time for what? You are going to die 8 times today. After saying that, Raon's fist struck Raon's face. Smack! Chapter 94. Kua! Raon grabbed his head and stepped back. He looked like an insane person, his untied hair flapping into the wind. Ugh! The extreme pain made him groan. He still couldn't understand what had happened. How was his sword already at his neck? Why did his face hurt? He couldn't understand anything. What did you do to me? Raon grit his teeth and raised his head, looking towards Raon, who was standing still, just looking at him. It's simple. I dodged your sword and punched you in the face. He answered, as casual as if discussing a meal. What I'm asking is how you did that. This makes it once. Raon raised his index finger while saying something completely unrelated to the question. What? I told you, you will die 8 times today. That just now was the price for your lie about sending a letter that we never received. Why, you bastard? Raon's eyes grew so wide that they looked like they would tear. He wanted to rip Raon's limbs apart right now. 8 times? Stop spouting bullshit. You are going to regret not having finished the sword duel just now for the rest of your life. Raon barked, swinging his flexible sword. Crash! The flexible aura-imbued sword started to devastate their surroundings. It was the radiant vortex of the crystal flexible sword. Rumble! The flexible sword thrashed like a kraken's tentacles, yet Raon dodged every single aura blade by using river footwork. How dare you! Raon clenched his fist and turned his flexible sword. The aura blade in his flexible sword trembled like a tidal wave, blocking Raon's path. I shouldn't try to get him in a single strike. Since he still didn't understand what happened back then, he needed to be careful. It was necessary to pressure him, like catching a bug in the room by cornering it. He wasn't just using his wrist, but also his elbow and shoulder to fully utilize the flexible sword's long blade. It must look like a wall of sword and aura blade in Raon's eyes. I'll make you into a fillet. Raon used the 10th form of the crystal flexible sword, Red Wall of Destruction. The flexible sword stormed at Raon, twisted like rose bushes. In the midst of deflecting the flexible sword by using river footwork, Raon turned around. He withdrew in order to avoid the Red Wall of Destruction. I got you. The Red Wall of Destruction grew faster if the opponent tries to run away. He was now just a rat in a trap. Stomp! After moving all the way to the back, Raon turned midair and kicked the ground. What is this guy? The way he was running at the wall of aura blade could be only described as crazy. Raon gasped. The moment the red wall of destruction was pushed back to the extreme, his body disappeared like a candlelight. Damn it! He hurriedly looked around. Expecting him to appear from his right side like the last time, he pulled his flexible sword. Is he not here? However, nothing could be seen from his right side. I'm on your left. Even before the word reached his ears, an excruciating pain could be felt from the left side of his face. Qua! Raon screamed from the impact to his left cheekbone, rolling on the ground. The pain wasn't subsiding. His cheekbone must have been crushed. Wah! Raon roared. He imbued his sword with aura to stick the blade on the ground, using it as a support to stand up. What did you do just now? You were definitely in front of me. This is the price for spitting on my mother's hand-grown flower. You crazy bastard. Looking at Raon's unwavering eyes, his chin trembled. It looked like that crazy bastard was seriously going to return the 8 debts. It's not over yet. Raon stepped back and gathered his aura from his energy center. He wasn't playing around anymore. Screw the sword duel, he decided he would kill him right there and then. Rumble. He brandished his flexible sword while spreading his aura to the mana circuits in his entire body. His clothes fluttered with his rambling aura, despite the windless atmosphere. I'm going to pluck your bones out before killing you. Raon thrust his straightened flexible sword. At lightning speed, it reached right in front of Raon's eyes in a blink of an eye. Whir! The moment Raon was about to swing his sword to defend himself, Raon's entire right arm started vibrating. Bomb! The intense vibration passed up the flexible sword, and its straight trajectory became twisted, like a coiled snake. It was the formidable technique of the crystal flexible sword of explosion, which ripped apart the enemy like a kraken crushing the ocean with its 8 tentacles. However, Raon didn't step back despite facing the sharp blade severing the air. His eyes shone as he lowered his posture. Is that bastard doing it again? Raon grit his teeth. He had disappeared and reappeared from his right and left side the last time his eyes shone like that. Qua! He thrust the flexible sword of explosion, along with all the aura he had gathered, to the best of his abilities. The gathering of aura blades puffed up like a balloon, storming at Raon. I need to focus. He couldn't let the same technique reach him 3 times in a row like an idiot. He sharpened his senses to their limits in preparation for Raon, who could pierce through the wall of his flexible sword at any moment. Crash! The powerful aura blade of the flexible sword of explosion cut through the ground like paper. However, he couldn't sense it cutting any flesh. He had disappeared once again. Where are you? Raon spread his aura perception and retrieved his flexible sword to block his surroundings. Left, right, or behind. He prepared himself so that he could block him no matter which direction he came from. I'm in front of you. However, Raon's voice could be heard from the front, not from left, right, or behind. He hurriedly tried to defend, but Raon moved faster. Smack! Raon's fist thrust like a ray of light, crushing Raon's chin. Qua! Raon grabbed his chin and screamed. It hurt. It hurt more than when he was hit on his cheeks, more than when his cheekbone was crushed. Ugh! The blood flowed to the ground. It looked like his jawbone was shattered and his skin was torn. The 3rd strike is for trampling on my mother's hand-grown flowers. Raon shook out his sword while walking towards Raon. I've understood everything about your sword. I won't even need to dodge anymore. Bullshit. Raon quickly stood up and started steaming from his mouth. His head was filled with the desire to kill him, but he bit his cheek to calm himself down. It's a provocation. A provocation. His fingers were trembling. He could end up fainting if he got beaten up any further. He was going to lose everything if he lost, which wasn't an option. Ha! He vibrated his entire energy center to spread aura throughout his body. He wouldn't last for a long time, but he could become stronger than ever for a moment. Bomb! Despite the exploding energy, he controlled his mind and calmly used the crystal flexible sword. A faster, sharper, flashier aura blade stormed into the air. He can't dodge this. The aura blade directed at Raon was the most accurate one so far. Raon used river footwork to enter into the wave of the aura blade. The crystal flexible sword he was using now was on a different level from what Raon had experienced so far. He was going to pay for his arrogance. Die. The moment he was about to pierce through Raon's heart with the extremity of the curved sword, Raon's sword came up diagonally. Clang! His arm faltered from the powerful impact transferred through the flexible sword. What? He was definitely aiming for his heart after deflecting Raon's sword, yet his technique was interrupted midway. Eek! Raon used the fourth form of the crystal flexible sword to pressure Raon. However, clang! Raon swung his sword, and the flexible sword bounced back and became limp. Ha! With a war cry, he launched another crystal flexible sword. However, his technique was cut to pieces each time Raon swung his sword, and he couldn't connect his strikes. And no way. His mind was breaking, despite having calmed it down with difficulty. He was nullifying his swordsmanship, as if he had really understood everything about his crystal flexible sword. I told you already, I know everything about your technique. Raon stormed at him after parrying his sword. Gee, get away from me. Raon thrust his left fist, but Raon easily dodged it, then struck him with his sword. Smack! His forehead was struck with the flat of his sword, sending him flying back like a kicked ball. Qua! Raon covered his forehead and writhed on the ground in extreme pain. This can't be true. He felt like fainting from the intense pain, but he bit his lip and stood back up. It wasn't the time for him to be lying around. This doesn't make any sense. It was impossible to understand the crystal flexible sword in that short of a time. No, it had to be impossible. The fourth is the cost for hitting Helen. Raon slowly walked towards Raon, ignoring his words. This can't be happening. Raon tightly grabbed on his sheath, taking up the flexible sword. Ha! He used the crystal flexible sword faster and sharper than ever. Sheesh! A powerful will was ingrained in the flexible sword, creating a flashy trajectory to storm at Raon. Speed, sharpness, power. Everything was on a different level from before. However, Raon's steps remained the same as before. He casually walked into the storm of the flexible sword, as if he were on a stroll. Clang! Raon swung his sword. It looked like he was just chasing away an insignificant fly, yet the flexible sword faltered significantly. That was enough to make all the changes and flow he had created so far. Eek! Raon didn't give up. He used another formidable technique by turning the wobbling flexible sword. Bomb! The aura blade in his sword rained down at him. Raon's star connecting sword connected his movement into a swing towards the rain of aura blade. Clang! It was a simple swing that had nothing special to it, yet the formidable technique of the crystal flexible sword was cut off and the flexible sword bounced back violently. What? What's happening? Raon stepped backwards with a trembling chin. He couldn't believe that he had cut off the formidable technique with a single swing even though he had just experienced it himself. Something's wrong with this. There's no way. He grabbed his left hand with his trembling right hand and swung the flexible sword. He used the second formidable technique of the crystal flexible sword, exploding fong. Ki! A sharp and fierce strike like a beast's fawn was aimed at Raon's heart and neck. Raon halted his movements. There was no sign of panic. He just lowered his sword. Whir! There was no hesitation in his movements, similar to a great painter drawing a picture. And the exploding fawn was dissolved, just like that. The aura blade dissipated and his technique was crushed, all from a single swing of his sword. Ah! Raon sighed. His heart tightened, looking at Raon walking up to him after erasing the exploding fawn. Star connecting sword and river footwork. Those were techniques that any swordsman in the continent would know, yet he was unable to pierce through them. Despite being well acquainted with the moves he was using, he couldn't find any way to defend against them. Huff, huff. He was out of breath. Each time Raon moved his sword, he felt like his head was entering a savage beast's mouth. Don't come closer. I'm telling you to stay away. He tried swinging his flexible sword again, but it was just bounced away by Raon's sword, ending up stuck in the ground. Smack! Upon reaching him after erasing all his aura blades, Raon took up his sword and slapped his cheek. Coo! He couldn't even speak because of the pain growing even worse, to the point that his limbs were convulsing. Ko! Instead of a scream, Raon let out a strange groan and grabbed his busted cheek. Stand up! The flame of anger burning in Raon's eyes wasn't extinguished yet. It's still only the fifth one. The sword duel went just like Raon had intended, from the beginning to the end. Raon yielded to his provocation and used the crystal flexible sword that he hadn't perfectly acquired yet, and Raon used the star connecting sword that he was so used to that he could use it with his eyes closed. Who was going to win if a swordsman that wasn't completely used to excellent swordsmanship fights was pitted against a swordsman who completed an average technique to perfection? Most people would believe it would be the former. That was not the case. An advanced yet incomplete technique created powerful and flashy strikes, but it couldn't adjust to every situation. On the other hand, a swordsman that perfected a basic swordsmanship could adjust to each situation in the most suitable way. At first, the swordsman with a powerful swordsmanship might look like he had the upper hand, but the difference would grow over time and the one with basic technique would end up with the advantage. Moreover, the most important part wasn't the technique, but the one using it. Since the person using the basic swordsmanship was Raon, who had learned the Ring of Fire and had Judiel's information, the one-sided beating on Raon was a natural course of action. Raon looked at Raon, who was trying to stand up as he bled. And not yet. It's not over yet. I will never lose. The severe murderous intent from his eyes was his malice, his desire to kill him at any cost. Qua! Raon's aura burst up. His surroundings were dyed green and the ground trembled. Ha! Feeling the frightening murderous intent and aura blade trying to rip his skin apart, Raon grew calmer and brandished his sword. Middle posture. It was one of the basic postures, consisting of holding the sword in front of the abdomen. Despite facing intense pressure, Raon's sword didn't waver in the slightest. Die! Raon swung his sword with explosive energy. The single blade was split into dozens of blades in the spur of the moment, thrusting at Raon's vital points all around his body. It was the final technique of the crystal flexible sword, Great Rainstorm, that Raon had been saving for last. Facing the bundle of aura blades, where a single one could cost his life, Raon brandished his sword. Compared to the flexible sword moving like a light, Raon's movement was so slow that it could be called boring. However, neither his sword nor his eyes were faltering. Whoosh! The moment the aura blade reached right under Raon's nose after tearing apart everything, Raon swung his sword. It wasn't slow, or fast, or flashy. Yet, the true meaning of swordsmanship was incorporated in it. Star connecting sword. Just as its name suggested, the techniques connected with each other naturally, without a single mistake. The great rainstorm that was about to swallow Raon was split apart by the great flow of the star connecting sword. Ah! Raon's bloodshot eyes could be seen in the midst of the aura blade tearing apart. It was an expression of bewilderment, rather than panic. Is that all? All? Aye. It will be annoying if you give up now. Raon shook out his sword and approached Raon. Because you need to die 3 more times. Chapter 95. My lady, I can't watch this anymore. Helen couldn't open her eyes even before the sword duel started. She had always viewed Raon as her own son, ever since he was born. And the fact that he was going to have a sword duel against Raon, who was infamous for his cruelty, was making her so nervous that she could hardly breathe. But we have to watch him. Unlike Helen, Sylvia was staring at Raon with her eyes wide open. Because he is fighting for our sake. Helen tried opening her eyes. Raon was standing in the middle of the training ground, warming himself up. The fact that he didn't look any different from usual eased her tension slightly. But I'm still nervous. How is my lady? Her eyes widened after she turned her head to look at Sylvia. It was because her hand was trembling so much that even the handrail was trembling with her. My lady. Helen barely managed to stop herself from crying. Sylvia was desperately trying not to show her emotions on the outside, despite being even more nervous and anxious than herself. Because she knew about Sylvia's difficult childhood, she felt both proud of her and sorry for her. Can she ever be happy? She felt bad for both Sylvia and Raon. She would have already made them leave that place if only she had the ability to do so. He will be all right. Judiel turned to look at them with a calm gaze. The young master has been preparing against Radin's flexible sword day and night. I'm sure everyone here will be astonished by his performance. That would be great, but... You are right. Let's think like that, Helen. Thank you. Sylvia thanked Judiel with her eyes. Let's hold hands. Come on. Pardon? Let's hold hands and pray for Raon's victory. Sylvia went ahead and grabbed Helen's hand. With a puzzled expression, Helen grabbed Judiel's hand, as she was sitting next to her. In that manner, every maid from the annex building held each other's hands. Judiel shook her head, feeling Helen and the other maids' wet and trembling hands. But they really don't need to worry about him at all. Raon was a monster. He was still weaker than countless strong warriors that she had encountered so far, but his temperament was on another level. She would never be able to forget Raon's gaze, the one that she witnessed that day. Remembering the fear and murderous intent dominating the space still gave her goosebumps. He was the real deal. He wasn't someone that could ever lose to that fake, the one that was just violent and nothing more. As Judiel was reminiscing about the day she witnessed Raon's true face, the ringmaster announced the start of the sword duel. Helen, who was sitting next to her, clasped her hand. Bam! Radin's flexible sword was extremely flashy right off the bat. Despite spectating from far away, she was able to feel its sharpness and ever-changing nature. On the other hand, Raon was using star-connecting sword and river footwork, both of which were just too honest. It looked like he was in an extremely precarious situation, like a flower petal fluttering inside a tornado. Sylvia and Helen's hands were shaking intensely. They are all mistaken. Judiel licked her lips. Raon's eyes were the same as the time that he had suppressed her. Bomb! Radin's technique was so flashy, to a point that it looked like he was bragging. The moment his aura blade twisted like a rose vine to attack Raon, he used the river footwork. It was a basic footwork that even she could use, yet he managed to dodge Radin's very technique and rushed at him from the right side. Radin kept watching from the front as if he didn't even notice, and Raon got his neck. He won. He won, my lady. Kaya. Helen and the maids screamed in joy as Raon's sword was right by Radin's neck. Sylvia sighed, still holding on the handrail. She seemed happier about the fact that Raon wasn't hurt, rather than his victory itself. Ha! Judiel exclaimed. She knew he was going to win, but she didn't expect him to win so easily. He is really huh? In the middle of her admiration, she saw Raon pulling back his sword and punching Radin's mouth. Radin bounced back while bleeding from his mouth, but he hadn't become any weaker. All it did was make him angrier, his aura gushing out like fire. Why? Sylvia screamed. It should have ended right there as his overwhelming victory. She couldn't understand why he had let him go. Radin turned his wrist to shoot his flexible sword at Raon's heart, wriggling like a snake. Raon stepped back with river footwork, but Radin's flexible sword kept following him. It almost looked like tracking magic was used. Radin's sword wriggled towards Raon's heart, but his expression stayed indifferent. He flowed like a lotus flower on the water to reach Radin's left side. Raon's sword was at Radin's neck once again, then he slapped his cheek this time. It was the second time. Raon let Radin off the hook even though he could have won once again. Radin now looked like an enraged monster as he swung his flexible sword. However, Raon didn't change in the slightest. He dodged the sword and dominated him from the front with a peaceful expression on his face. Smack! Raon kicked Radin's face so hard that the sound reached the stands. Helen bit her lip. She finally realized why Raon was letting him go. He is taking revenge for us. Raon was returning Raden's misdeeds in the annex building, one by one. Punching his mouth first was revenge for his lie about sending a letter, and slapping his face was for spitting on the ground. And what he did just then was for trampling on the flowers. Ah! An unbearable emotion seeped into her heart. Bloodline was equal to strength in Zigheart. Sylvia was the only person that treated her properly, as she wasn't even a collateral, let alone a member of the direct line. She had realized that cruel reality when Sylvia had left the house, the fact that she was the only person who treated the maids as human beings in that entire cold earth. However, there was now one other person. The person that was with her from the moment of his birth, Raon, son of Sylvia. He was fighting against a member of the direct line for their sake and crushing them. She couldn't hold back her tears, sensing Raon's intentions. Huff. Hearing the sound of someone trying not to cry, Helen turned her head. The other maids were also shedding tears, noticing Raon's intentions. Everyone was feeling the same emotions. They were moved to tears because it was the first time someone had cared for them so much. And Sylvia was proudly watching Raon, her mouth tightly closed. It was the same confident expression as before she had lost her aura and swordsmanship. However, Sylvia was actually more delighted than Helen thought. She had always been daunted because no one had cared for her since she was born. She was left out in the cold like she never existed, despite being a member of the direct line. Her father, her brothers, and the house all weighed down on her, suffocating her. That was why she had decided to run away. She ran away from the family to obtain her freedom. However, that wasn't the correct answer. She should have overcome it with her own strength, no matter how terrible that place was. And that was what her son Raon was telling her. He was born weaker than anyone, yet his mind was now stronger than anyone else's. Such a boy was telling her with his back that it didn't matter who his opponent was, he would fight until the very end so that they wouldn't dare try anything funny. Raon. Feeling her turbulent emotion, Sylvia clenched her fist. Creak. Creak. Balder ground his teeth while looking down on the training ground. How is this happening? He thought Raden's victory had already been decided. And that wasn't just his opinion. More than 90% of the people in the training ground must have expected Raden's overwhelming victory. However, it was completely different once the fight began. Raden was one-sidedly getting beaten up by Raon, who was using lower-grade swordsmanship and footwork. The fight would have been already over after the first clash if Raon desired it. That was how much of a difference there was between the two of them. Whoosh! Raon split apart the last technique of Raden's crystal flexible sword, using the plain star connecting sword and river footwork. That's crazy! Balder unconsciously gasped. He couldn't believe his eyes as Raon Zigheart's sword displayed the true purpose of the star connecting sword. One needed to infuse the sword with their will in order to achieve the true purpose of swordsmanship. Only those at an advanced level expert or higher were capable of doing that. Yet, he had become an expert only recently, and he was just a 15-year-old boy. It felt like a dream, a terrifying nightmare. Raden was unable to think rationally, and he could never pierce through Raon's sword in his state. The sword duel was already over, in an opposite way from what he had expected. A genius. No, he is more than that. The continent was vast, and geniuses were numerous. Not just Zigheart, every armed organization regardless of its size had someone called a genius. Raon couldn't be described by a word like that. A monster that grows by devouring geniuses, he was a devil that would stand at the apex of the continent with his sword. A mere collateral. Collateral. The fact that he was winning against his son made him boil with anger. Even though he was Sylvia's son, he was just an inferior boy from the seed of an unknown origin. That bastard. Wha! I hit the jackpot. As he was about to spread his pressure, somebody started yelling in a light and unpolished voice right next to him. It was Rimmer's voice. My life's turning around. He kept shouting in joy, swinging the papers he was holding in both hands. Shut up already. Ha! Oh no, I'm sorry. Rimmer bowed while scratching his head. However, his gaze was as frightening as a warrior about to fight. That's why I told you that Raon was going to win. He moved next to Balder and grinned. You are going to spend a lot of money and time to prepare the reward for the bet. Well, I've already won a lot without that. Rimmer giggled and pointed at the papers he was holding. They were proof of the bets he had made with different people. I told you to shut up. Balder's atmosphere became as sharp as a polished blade. He looked like he was about to attack him at any moment. Since you must have already realized the fight is over, I'm going to leave after telling you one thing. Rimmer came up right under Balder's nose. Many people are going to be watching Raon from today onward. Never touch Raon or the annex building unless you are confident that you can avoid all those eyes. How dare you? Balder frowned. Rimmer's eyes were no different from back in the day, when he was called the Sword of Light. His eyes glowed fiercely, like a father wolf angry at seeing his son hurt. Instead of me, you should be afraid of the head of house. You know he really hates people who break their promises. His frightening pressure disappeared in an instant, and he left like a giggling loafer. He is right. Both Raon and the annex building would become difficult to deal with unless he took care of him before the rumor spread. And his two sons and the other direct lineage nieces and nephews would be overshadowed by him. That was how dangerous he was. Raden. Balder secretly used aura to send Raden a message. Forget about sharpness and variety. Use strength. Break him with power. Use what you are better at to your advantage. He conveyed a hint to defeat Raon. It could become problematic in the future, but winning was the highest priority for now. Win. I'll deal with the rest somehow. Raon narrowed his eyes. He thought Raden had given up, yet his will had returned to his eyes as he stood back up. He wasn't spreading his aura anymore, surrounding his sword with it instead, as if he was using a normal sword. I see. The Ring of Fire had noticed a faint aura flowing down from the stands. He thought it wasn't anything special, but it looked like Balder had told him the way to win. Like father, like son. Raon turned around to look at Balder, who was pretending he did nothing. A sword duel was a match of pride and might between the two swordsmen. He was completely shameless, despite having interfered in that noble fight. It looked like he was telling him he could do anything since he was a member of the direct line and Glenn's son. Raden's eyes were the same as Balder's. He gathered all his remaining aura in his sword, just like he was advised. His posture wasn't that of crystal flexible sword as he glared at Raon. It looked like Balder's dirty interference was indeed effective. Yes, I should have done this from the beginning. Raden spat his bloody saliva and growled. His straightened flexible sword was burning in an intense aura blade. I should have beaten you up with the most advantageous method to me. It was true, since the amount of Raden's aura was a lot bigger than Raon's. However, just like powerful technique wasn't everything, the amount of aura wasn't a decisive factor either. Do you think you can win in a fight of power? Of course. I'll shred your weak aura to pieces. Raden pounced at him and swung his flexible sword. The powerful strike looked like it could split the ground in half. Clench. Raon brandished his sword. The small flame ignited at the point of his sword multiplied itself and burned. Clang. A flaming sword that melted the atmosphere clashed with the flexible sword surrounded by a green aura. Gasp. Raden grit his teeth. The shock was making him nauseous. He couldn't believe his power would increase that much just from multiplying the flames. How did you? It's not over yet. Raon's eyes burned crimson, just like his sword. 10,000 flames cultivation, 10 flames. Extending strike. The dancing red flame dashed through the blade to burn up Raden's aura and pierced the flexible sword. Clang. The flexible sword was shattered into pieces, and Raden's eyes looked like they would burst out of his head. And no way. Where are you trying to go? Raden stepped back, trying to withdraw, but Raon was faster. Wait. Low. There's still 2 more times to go. Raon smashed the fist holding his sword into Raden's mouth. Raden's teeth came out like corn kernels, and he collapsed back with his eyes rolled up. I'll spare you the last one with this. Raon waved his sword. As the flame on his sword was extinguished, the entire training ground fell silent.